guess. The hardest one is the employees. What the hell do you tell the employees? That's always the toughie, because you go around saying, "Oh, time's really hard," and then you turn up in your Ferrari. It's like for me, actually, I don't think the employees are as interested as you think they are in the finance of the company. I mean, there's nothing more um, dull than getting the finance director to a presentation for 30 minutes talking about the numbers. I mean, that's guaranteed to turn them off.
Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. We'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Welcome to this episode of the Move Your Business Forward podcast series. We're on the same topic of talking about the big squeeze. So all the challenges that companies are facing from increased costs, struggling to recruit and retain staff, and various other supply chain issues that are out there. One of the things that companies I come across really struggle with is having a lack of financial transparency for their business and the various stakeholders involved. So for this episode, I'm joined by two finance directors, experienced finance directors, who work closely with Phil Biggs and Colin Nunn, who both work with a portfolio of businesses, some early stage startups, all the way through to well-established companies. I'm just going to share some thoughts with both of you around what companies can do to improve their financial transparency. I think one of the first things is probably to figure out, financial transparency to who. Phil, I don't know if you've got some thoughts around that in terms of the various stakeholders you would be thinking about if you're looking at a business and trying to help them with getting better oversight and better transparency around their numbers.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the top of the agenda is the management team having, you need to be very honest with, within the management team about having a solid picture of what's happening within the business from a financial standpoint. I think the other stakeholders you need to kind of consider is, to what information is available to staff. I mean, we always like to, I think, as far as possible, I think working with the business, try to make things, the staff as aware of what's happening in the business as possible, but there are limitations to that, and there are good reasons why there are limitations to that. And last, two other kind of major groups, obviously the stakeholders and the shareholders within the business, or investors. A very interesting conversation in terms about transparency with investors, because obviously they're very keen to see the return on their investment, but at the same time is they may be very demanding of what they see and what information that they want access to. Last group, and it's not always necessarily foremost in people's mind when they start a business, but customers expect to see a reasonable amount of transparency, particularly if you're dealing with larger organizations. Some of the business I work with, we work with a lot of blue chip businesses. You need to be basically demonstrating that you're a viable business and that you've got backing. Otherwise, they cut you off pretty quickly. So those are kind of probably the four, four-ish groups that I would probably name off the top of my head. Colin, have you got maybe anyone to add to that? I'm not sure if I've missed anyone.
So I'll talk about two, I guess. The hardest one is the employees. What the hell do you tell the employees? That's always the toughie, because you go around saying, "Oh, time's really hard," and then you turn up in your Ferrari. It's like, for me, actually, I don't think the employees are as interested as you think they are in the finance of the company. I mean, there's nothing more dull than getting the finance director to a presentation for 30 minutes talking about the numbers. I mean, that's guaranteed to turn them off. And, it's almost like you're doing fine, we're doing great, we're doing badly, it's a struggle. But I would always be honest with the employees. If you are struggling, then tell them. Then with a bit of luck, they'll make an effort. It's sort of, I don't know, I'm not into football, but the football analogy is, two places above the relegation zone. Like, come on, guys, we got to go for it. So me, I'm bizarre for a finance guy. I'm way more transparent with employees than I think most people are. I tell them pretty much what they want to know. I don't think there should be secrets in a company.
I like your point about the limitations about what they're interested in, though, because I think certainly I found that whenever you do presentations for people, generally what they want to know is, have I got a job? Am I going to get a bonus? And then finally, if I cap it all, are we going to sell the business for millions and I'm going to be a very rich man? On varying stages, but when you start to get into a lot of detail, it's not necessarily what people are particularly interested in. Is they basically want a high level know, are we okay? That's what they want to know.
And
Yeah,
I think
totally
also
agree with
the thing I'd add to that is when you're talking about the things that are going to impact employees, so pay, bonuses, and all that kind of stuff, is educating them on what numbers there are that they can have an impact on. How many clients are we winning? How many of those clients are staying with the business? What's our kind of average spend? Yeah, how does that impact everyone in the business? And talking about those main metrics that are going to result in everyone in the business being able to be paid more and having more secure jobs, I think is the key, but doing it in a simple way. I don't know if you've got any thoughts around that, how to pick out those key aspects that are going to be the drivers for paying employees better and helping them. Yeah, how do you find them and translate them into useful insights?
Well, I think from the employee perspective, it's way more simple than you think. And it's almost not number based. It's almost like we're doing fine. But don't tell me you're doing fine when you're not, and don't tell me you're doing great because they're asked for a pay rise when you're not doing great. It's not P&L and balance sheet and cash flows. It's not that. It's almost like the chat by the coffee machine. It's that level of communication for me.
And what about saying, we're doing fine, but we could do better, and these are the things we're really, really keen to progress in a business? Would you be open and get those right? Do you think, Colin?
Yeah. I'm pretty transparent. Yeah. I mean, for me, I don't know. It's the most important thing in the company is the employees, right? And getting the employees motivated is the most important thing. And if they are not getting the information they want, or they think that you're blagging them, they're not motivated, are they?
Yeah. So one thing,
the other one is just going off a tangent. You talk about the investors. So
Yeah.
for me, people don't give enough information to investors either, and they are more sophisticated, you would think. For me, they own the company, and you probably gave them the forecast that you're missing, and you're probably embarrassed, and you don't want to talk to them, but you just got to talk to them, just face up to it, and they probably won't be surprised that you missed your forecast, and they're going to find out sooner rather than later, and they are desperate for your business to succeed. They're just as keen as you are. So keeping them in the dark for me is a colossal mistake, because if things do start going awry, and it's a horrible shock to them, they're not going to receive bad news very well. But if you keep them informed throughout, and then maybe it's a cash call, there's a funding raise, and they go, yeah, totally familiar with what's going on, and they're more amenable to helping out. Yeah. So I mean, I you don't want them phoning you up, but boring you for an hour. But a monthly newsletter, some sort of standard dialogue is what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that I'd agree with that. One of the interesting things about investors is it suddenly becomes an interesting discussion. Is if you have lots of little investors, it becomes a much more difficult conversation, or much more complicated conversation, and multiple conversations than having, say, a single investor who may be, maybe better or worse, but it's a very different conversation depending on the type of investors or people you've got who are shareholders in the business.
No, agreed. One other thing I'll expand on is with obviously companies with investors. I get it, the kind of information you should be sharing and be willing to update them on. We obviously work with companies without investors, other than the owners of the business, which are the founders often. And for some companies, the founders, I don't think necessarily measure their return or their business asset as well as they should do, because at the end of the day, people, in my opinion, should be in business because they're looking to grow something that's going to be profitable, to generate cash for themselves now, but also build that value that eventually they can sell. And I think sometimes when you're having a management team meeting with just your management team and not necessarily your shareholders, you're not always talking about the same things you should be as the shareholders, and even if that is just a couple of founders. Have you got any thoughts as to why or what the founders should be looking at if they're thinking of selling their business at some point, either through a trade sale or potentially going down an employee ownership route? The kind of things they should be thinking to make sure they're getting a good return on their investment of their own money, or even their time, right? If you spent years and decades building up a business, getting a return on that time you've put in. Have you got any thoughts around that, Colin?
I mean, for me, the bizarre answer is share options. I'm from a tech world, so every company I've ever worked for, I've had share options. And well, certainly if you're in the tech world and not giving share options, then you're fraught with danger of losing your employees. But across the board, it's not just tech companies. I think every company should give employee share options to their employees. I'm not talking giving 30% of their business away, but I think that share options are correctly written, and get expert advice on how you do it. But correctly written, they are very motivational. And again, the motivated employees, there's nothing more important. And you're sitting in sitting in a meeting and sort of, you're doing absolutely fabulously. All the employees are thinking, well, I don't really care. It's like they'll start caring if they've got some skin in the game. So I would always go option route, and for sure they'll be more interested in receiving financial information the more on board.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Colin. Phil, any thoughts on what those other shareholders or
Yeah,
you're looking at?
I mean, it's an interesting one where you've got like some management, if you don't have external investors and, it's effectively the management team are the founders, it can be quite difficult to kind of separate yourself from the two in terms of my long-term investment and my short-term need to be able to see, to be in this place, to be able to see it as purely as a shareholder. I think, I agree with Colin certainly in terms of motivation. I think share options are a great way and a relatively inexpensive way, very inexpensive way of being able to get people incentivized, because ultimately you're really promising things in people in the long term. I think in terms of the management team, again, I think it's about regularly stepping back and basically looking at the business rather than what is the immediate, what do we need to do? Because typically most management teams are just worried about the, you're particularly in a startup, you're looking at, what's happening at the moment, how can we manage cash flow, what can we do? We've got so many things on our plate to do. Whereas if you're regularly stepping back and saying, well, is this particular investment that we're making the right thing to do for the business? And you're doing that kind of more strategically. And that's a great thing to say, because it's not that easy to do when your head is buried in the detail. But if you can do that on a regular basis, then you're more likely to be able to make kind of a decent assessment.
No, I think that's a really good point, Phil. And I think having that step back and going, is this a proper long-term investment that we should be making, and are we doing it for the right reasons? And I think this comes to staff as well. I think people investing potentially more and more money into people that they might have never done before is making sure that's definitely part of the long-term plan for the business. And how are you de-risking the fact that someone you're going to invest a lot of time in and salary is not going to be around for the foreseeable part of time that you want them to be? How can you lock that in with potentially some options, or just making sure you're getting the right people and you've sold them the right opportunity that they're expecting? And I think that's all part of this, is just making sure that investment, whether it be an asset or whether it be a person, is it's linked to the wider strategy that you've got. So just coming back to top tips. So Colin, back to you first. If you were going to talk to any business owner or founders of a company on the topic of there being a lack of financial transparency and improving that situation, what would be your top tip to them?
I would say it's a lack of snippets rather than the lack of an FD presentation for half an hour. And it's not a staff meeting once a month with the FD. It's just constant snippets of dialogue, that you're not embarrassed how the company is doing for good or bad, that you are open and honest about it.
And if those snippets, what have you seen as great examples of snippets that have been useful and rewarding to all those stakeholders?
Well, I mean, for example, we're struggling, we really need to win this contract. Rather than, wouldn't it be nice to win this contract? I think the former is way more compelling, isn't it? It's like, we really need to win this contract. We are 2 points above the relegation zone. And that's where an open dialogue, but if you just say that all the time, people just like, oh, God, whatever, it's blagging again. So yeah, it's just say what you think, not sort of some knee-jerk reaction style, but say what you think, and don't hide fears from the employees, because they're not stupid.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Colin. And Phil, any top tip that you would pass on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would hark back to what Colin just mentioned about on the investment side. Much the same as employees. I mean, not necessarily done the same way. I think being upfront with your investors as early as possible. They are they have a lot invested within your business, and they are also a potential source of future funds. But the one thing that you can't, you need to be, very, very mindful of being upfront and being as forward thinking with them as you possibly can. So when you find out that you're going to be, hitting a major problem, it's much better having an early conversation than a late conversation. A late conversation basically is a very difficult situation to manage, because not only are you in that situation, and we can all hope that we will find some miraculous, resolution. But if you've already briefed your investor in advance, then you're at least in the situation that you're both, aware of the same information. And yes, you may have unexpected results from them, but it's a lot easier to then have a follow-up conversation about what you can jointly do together, rather than wait for some disaster to occur.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, I think those early conversations are much better and important. Just one final thing to touch on, because I think, Phil, you brought this up as one of the stakeholders, is your customers, because I think everything we've spoken about is kind of your internal stakeholders that have a clear interest in the success of the business, whether that's because they want a job or want to retain their job, or they're an investor. What about dealing with your customers? If things are tough, I see a lot of companies that look desperate to win business and do things like discount or just appear very desperate. And at the end of the day, it's not always going to help them on the bottom line if they're discounting too much. Have you got any thoughts as to how to embrace those conversations with customers, especially when things might be going as well as you would have hoped?
Yeah, I mean, some examples I found are really useful, but interesting in the different sectors have different kind of applications. Certainly within the tech sector, I've found in the past is, early, a number of occasions where we've worked with a customer to fund a piece of development that we would have otherwise had to fund elsewhere. So the customer is ultimately funding a piece of work which is then reusable, but they get preferred treatment, they get advanced features, they get a lot of things into that kind of relationship. So it's building a very kind of strong relationship with that customer, is one way of being able to both, to establish a quite an interesting relationship. It's very collaborative relationship. I think with customers generally, it's like, there is that, there are certain, certainly with larger companies, there are certain expectations that they will want pieces of information, and there's you won't get past a contract unless you can provide certain details. So there are some very practical things that you have to do. For example, they may wish to see your accounts. They may wish to see that you've got, certain pieces of documentation or compliance in place. But I think, and those are a must, but I think then beyond that, establishing a relationship with your customers that, it as collaborative as possible, because ultimately they will be the people who are, along with your staff, are, the key aspects of what that's going to make the business a success. That's not always possible, but I think it's certainly from the outset, if you start with the basis that you're going to work very closely with your customers, then that is the goal that you can get to. That's potentially where you might make the maximum use of that relationship.
Yeah, I think it's kind of creating win-wins for everyone, isn't it? If you can help your customer win and it works for you from a servicing that customer at a profitable level, it really helps. And that's the kind of partnership you really want to form. Colin, any thoughts on that relationship with customers, especially when times are tough?
It's really hard. And that's a question for the marketing department, isn't it? I mean, I've just put a new roof on my house, and I've got a nice cheap supplier, and you know what? I've got a nice cheap job. Day one, first rainstorm, bloody thing leaked. It's just somehow getting across the value of your offering and not the price of your offering.
Yeah.
and convincing the customer that if you want a cheap job, you will get a cheap job.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's is having that confidence to have that conversation, and building those relationships mean you can much more easily have those conversations for sure. Great.
You're buying on quality, not on price.
No, exactly. Well, look, thank you both for sharing your thoughts on that topic. I've enjoyed talking to you both today for this episode, so thank you very much for your time. And hopefully we'll see you again on another episode at some point.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.